who is an expert in bringing out the best in storytellers, in storytelling. Hi, Sally.
Hi, Ellouise.
I've been looking forward to having you here so that we could find out some of your secrets. We want to know your secrets.
Well, thank you. It's a delight to be here.
Yeah. Now, you're saying that you're a storytelling coach.
That's right. I'm more of a story listener than a storyteller.
Okay, which makes you a good coach. You can't coach if you can't listen. How did you get to be a storyteller coach?
Funny you should ask.
Yeah.
It all started in 1993. Well, actually, it started a lot earlier than that. I've loved stories all my life, but I never knew I could make a career out of it. And up until about 2001, I was a hardcore techie. What happened was in 1993, I posted an ad on the internet and got a husband, Ray, who's a professional speaker. And he started bringing me to National Speakers Association conventions, and I just fell in love with professional speaking. And then he started asking me for help with his presentations.
Wow. Now, when you met, that's just a whole story in its own self. You slipped that in there on us, haven't you? You just slipped that in there. You put that ad out, got a husband. I mean, my goodness. He had no idea that you had this ability.
Absolutely none.
Did you?
No.
So how did you discover that?
We moved to the D.C. area, to the Washington, D.C. area from Los Angeles in '96, and I went from being coordinator of administrative computing at Occidental College to being unemployed.
Yes, yeah.
And so I started a business coaching professional speakers to build and maintain their own websites. And I'd sit with them and we'd do, this much techie stuff and this much finding out who they were. And they'd tell me these absolutely wonderful stories about how they got into what they did or what their passion was. And I'd say to them, you've got to put that on your website. That is wonderful. And they say, I can't do that. It's too personal. And I'd say, you have to. And when they did, their business would grow because people felt like they knew them as human beings.
Does that relate? The thing that pops into my mind when you talk, that's really fascinating, by the way. The thing that pops into my mind is as storytelling and business, storytelling and business became more of a topic within the storyteller community, people would say, find your niche, brand yourself. Mm-hmm. Is that an early version of that where you were advising people to know who they were?
Yes, except that most people say find your niche and do all that stuff and brand yourself and then find the story. What I do with people is I find their stories first, because when you discover the stories of who you are and what makes you tick, it informs you about who you are and where you need to go in the future. When you look at your past and your stories, and you tell your past stories, it helps you build what your future is going to be.
Can you give us a little example of that? That's actually fascinating.
Okay, well, people come into my workshops and they say they don't have any stories, and then I take them through a process. And I love this one woman, her name's Fran. And by the way, I don't talk about people without their permission.
I understand.
She got down into her childhood and recalled a story about being one of 3 children, and she was the middle child. Her older brother was kind of one of these guys that would lie down on the couch and let her do all the chores, and then her little sister was too young. The parents would go to work on Saturday morning and leave the kids to clean up the house, and of course Fran would do it all. Well, one morning she just snapped.
I don't blame her.
Yeah, I don't either. And what happened was her brother loved oatmeal, and he had a pot of oatmeal on the stove cooking. And she went to the refrigerator and got this jar of sour pickles and poured sour pickle juice into his oatmeal.
Oh.
And the story goes on and on. But the bottom line was it was the moment when she stopped being a doormat and stepped into her position as a leader.
Interesting. Now, how did she take that and use it to her advantage in her life today?
Well, for one thing, it informed her about where she had been and where she is now, and gave her more confidence in who she is. And she uses stories in her presentations now. And what happened when she started using stories in her presentations was her speaking fee doubled.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's something interesting. You know, I'm taking notes. Are all of you taking notes if you're storytellers?
You don't need that. No, you already know about storytelling.
No. So that is really interesting. Now, people come to you, to your workshops, because they want to learn how to improve their speaking ability in their business, or what brings them to you?
I actually draw a wide variety of people. I get people in my workshops who have a terrible fear of public speaking. They're just deathly afraid, up through people that have been teaching public speaking for 20 years. The main thing is they want to harness the power of story, because as you know, storytelling has been the #1 form of communication since people learned to talk.
Yes, yeah.
And what happens, there's actually brain science behind storytelling. I had the good fortune to have a neuroscientist named Chris Bow, PhD, in one of my workshops. And after the workshop, I asked him if he would do a research paper for me on storytelling in the brain. Because I always knew in my gut stories were important, but I didn't know why, other than the fact that I liked them, and I noticed that other people liked them too.
Right.
His bottom line was, when you tell somebody a fact, it just goes in a teeny little pinpoint in your brain. When you tell somebody a story that has visual details, it has sensory details, emotional details, those details are stored in your brain in the same place it would have been stored had you actually had that experience yourself. So what happens when you tell somebody a story, it becomes a much richer memory that's much more easy to retrieve. So you take a story and you put it together with facts, and people will then remember both the story and the facts.
How interesting, because, and so that then relies on the power of that. I'm jumping, but the power of that seems to me comes from the ability of the storyteller to make it visual and have bring in the senses, and the better that that's done, the stronger the memory, the stronger the story stays with you.
Yes, absolutely.
And so many of our childhood stories are carried on advertisements. You know, I can still see the little girl with the Morton salt walking in the rain. Can you know, the whole message of that was it doesn't clump in the wet.
Right, yeah.
You know, and I must have been 5 years old looking at a big billboard someplace. So that must be what business is really wanting to has finally realized that that's what will transfer.
Yes, yes. And it's not just a matter of business, it's a matter of, I work with a lot of professional speakers who go out to either inform or motivate people. And if you want to motivate somebody, or if you want to inform them and have them actually get what you're talking about, if you tell them a story, for instance, say you want parents to buckle their children into seatbelts. You can say, buckle your child into the seatbelt. Or you can tell a story, like I tell sometimes, about a young girl who was in a pickup truck sitting on her sister's lap with no seatbelt. The driver slammed on the brakes. The child went through the windshield and immediately died. The child was not buckled in. Right. So what do you think would have more of a chance of getting people to buckle in their children in? Telling that story or just telling them to buckle up?
Yeah, the image of that child.
Yeah.
Yeah, the image of the child, absolutely. A thought that comes to my mind, because of course we in the storytelling world, you know, we who are storytellers use coaches.
Of course.
And one of the things that is often talked about in storytelling workshops is the storyteller remains in charge, that if you come in too strong on critiquing a story, you can silence a story. Now, is that so you don't give like definitive, do this, do this, do this? But does that hold true in the kind of coaching that you're doing? Because aren't you wanting to instruct people how to do it better?
Of course.
Okay, so what form do you use?
I tell people what to do. I actually don't so much tell them as I ask them questions that help them bring details in. I'll say, well, tell me about what happened at this point. What did you do there? What did you see? What did you smell? What did you hear? And I'm asking them questions that help them bring out the details that bring the story to life. I'll ask them what did the person say? What did you say? Because when you bring dialogue in, you really invigorate a story when you bring in the sensory details and the dialogue.
All right, what about how to stand and how to walk and how to present yourself? Does that come into what you want to do in your workshops or in helping people?
I do a little bit of that, not too much of that. I don't teach the acting part of it. Mm-hmm. Most of the time I teach what I call conversational storytelling, which is just having a conversation with the audience instead of performing the story. Although if I see somebody that I think should really be in a high performance storytelling, I will send them to somebody else, because that's not really what I teach. Although what I've discovered is when people really relive, by the way, I only teach people to tell their own personal stories, right. Not fairy tales. There's place for that, that's just not what I do.
Right.
So what I do is I have them actually relive the story. And what I've discovered happens is when they're back in that story, they're actually moving that story in a beautiful physical way that works.
Now, one of the tricks, great, I've got all of that very clear, very crystal clear. I'm sure our audience is getting that, we'll be able to put that to use. Storytellers use a thing which we call a storyboard. Mm-hmm. Do you use the story, you know what, where you do it scene by scene as you're learning a story or you're developing a story? Is there a device like that you like particularly?
Yeah, I actually have story worksheets that I have them work through that actually go through the various pieces of a story. And most of the stories I teach people to tell are shorter stories. They're usually 3 minutes to 5 minutes and not normally longer than that, maybe occasionally. And I help them discover the components and put them together in the right order.
Now, I want to jump back just a little bit. We only have about a minute before we're going to go to our break. Mm-hmm. Is that how did you discover yourself with the ability to listen to stories and to help people? It's like you heard people telling stories and then wanted to put it on the website and this sort of thing. Where did that come from? Is that something from your childhood, or is that an ability of listening that you just developed as a kid, or what?
It came from a combination of what I already told you about the website stuff, but I also got trained how to train public speakers. So I had my speakers with just the plain old ordinary speaking, and then I realized that what was missing in the speaking was storytelling. So I started actually researching storytelling, reading books, watching storytellers, watching speakers, analyzing how they told stories.
See, I'm glad I asked that question, because that says how you transferred what you were already doing into a new way.
There's actually one more piece that I only realized recently, and that's when I was a hardcore techie. I was a database designer. And a key to database design is seeing all these different little pieces and putting them together in a coherent whole. And it's the same thing with storytelling, is you have all of these little pieces and you put them together in a whole that makes sense.
Like with a beginning, middle, and an end.
Yeah!
Thank you. We'll take a break, and then we'll be back in just a minute. Do not go away. There's much more to come. Thank you.
Explore new worlds. Read. Visit literacy.gov.
Welcome back. Here we are with Sally Strackbein again to continue our conversation about the work she does with speakers and storytelling as their coach and mentor. Sally, why you were trained with people who were speaking, say a regular speech, and now you're working with people who are storytelling. How do those two come together?
Most of the people I work with on storytelling are actually going to use their storytelling in presentations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my main focus.
And how do you advise them to do that? How do you lead them? What are they doing?
First, we have to discover. I come at it from the perspective that you discover the stories first. And when you discover the stories, as I said earlier, it informs you on where you need to go. Then you figure out, okay, this story makes this point, because in speaking, a story's got to have a point. It's got to have a learning message. And so that learning message becomes crystal clear, and you figure out which presentation it goes into. And then you figure out how that story relates to the message that the speaker wants the audience to walk away with and remember.
All right, let's talk about that for a second. Maybe you're as confused as I am right now. That, are you talking about selling a product? Are you talking about a campaign, selling a candidate? Are you talking about a social issue, about any of those kinds of things, issues or people or products? How does that work?
Well, first of all, the answer is yes.
Okay.
If you want to sell a candidate, for the most part, I think the first thing you need to do is humanize that candidate, because people vote for or buy from people they know, like, and trust. And if they don't feel like they know you, they don't feel like they like you, and they don't feel like they trust you, they're not going to vote for you as a candidate, or they're not going to buy from you if you're selling something.
Okay, so if I decide I want to run for mayor, and I walk in, then every speech I give has got to somehow introduce me to people?
Absolutely, because you never know who in that audience has never seen you before, never heard you before. And if you connect with people through a story, that opens up their heart to listen to whatever facts you're going to tell them. Someone, I think it goes back to Theodore Roosevelt, said that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that was Theodore Roosevelt who said that.
Isn't that interesting?
And that's been attributed to many different people, so I don't know for 100% sure who it's quoted. But when people feel like they know you through your stories, through your personal stories, then they'll open up to your other message.
Because now one thing I remember, my husband and I were living in Brooklyn, New York, in 1957, a little history here, and I went down to answer the door. We were living upstairs in a boarding house, and there was a guy there, and he wanted me to look at two pictures about a product, toothpaste or something, and one just had the picture of the toothpaste, and the other had a picture of a celebrity holding the toothpaste. And that's the truth. This is absolutely true. And asked me which one I would buy, which picture would lead me. And just because I'm a contrarian, I said, well, certainly not from that person. But now we've gone overboard, I think, with how we bring in celebrities.
Yeah.
So how does that fit with storytelling? Has I think I'm making a point, but I'm not really sure. Is it the personality of the teller, of the celebrity, or can you then have to tell the story of the product as well?
You have to tell the story of the product as well. I remember listening to the radio, and there was a story about a person who had gotten in late at night on a business trip, checked into a hotel. Their suitcase had fallen apart. The handle had fallen off of the suitcase. And they had to go someplace else the next day. And the bellman said, "Let me have your suitcase," and the person said, "No, no, 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 no." And finally, the bellman convinced the person to give him the suitcase. Well, the next morning, the suitcase was back repaired, and this was a commercial for a hotel. And so you think, would I want to stay in a hotel that took care of me like that?
Yes.
Of
yes.
course you would.
Yes.
So those are the kinds of stories I go for. Not the blockbuster, it's going to be a movie stories, but the smaller stories that give people a glimpse in who you are and what your values are.
And so that everybody's on the same playing field.
Yes, the universal story, the story that we all love our kids, the story that everybody would agree with, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or a religious person or an atheist. We pretty much all agree that we love our children and we want them to be safe and happy.
Right.
The connecting stories are the ones that I look for.
Now, I heard you on video on your website, which is
Definingstory.com.
that the speech is really filled with stories if you're doing it well.
That's correct. Because have you ever been to a presentation where somebody you feel like you've had a fire hose full of facts and you walk out and you can't remember any of it? Mm-hmm. One of the things I tell my clients is, let's cut down on the content. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but people can only take in so much new information. So you want to cut down the information and make the information you give them something that they remember. Then it actually does them some good.
Right. I think that was demonstrated recently at the Democratic National Convention when former President Clinton spoke about arithmetic. You know, that he was a prime example of not giving too many statistics, but getting back down to a 2 and 2 per do you know what I'm saying?
Yes,
I think
yes.
that's it. So you're thinking that if you're doing a presentation and you can do some of that, some of your statistics, and yet bring it into a down-home way, then they're going to remember what you said.
That's right.
Right, because I don't remember a single number that he said that night. I just remember 2 and 2, and that's good arithmetic. So that's
and see, that's exactly it. You remember the message that he wanted you to get, and that message was that he wanted you to look at Barack Obama, and that's the message that you got, that Barack Obama has the arithmetic right.
And that's what he came there to do. So he accomplished his purpose.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He's a phenomenal speaker.
Yeah.
I saw him on C-SPAN a number of years ago. I think it was on Book TV, and he was talking about how as a child he would sit on the front porch and the older people would be telling him stories. So he came out of a story culture.
Right.
And he also came out of a culture where when you're telling a story, you look at people. When you're listening to a story, you look at people. And he's so charismatic that way in the way he is with another person and gives them his full attention.
That's what's taught in the storyteller, and you've got it, so you must be doing it too. In the storyteller workshops and whatever that I've gone to is look people in the eye so that you're speaking to them, mm-hmm. Bring it down home, and more detail and whatever. That's the Southern tradition.
And it works.
Right, and it's been working for years and years and years.
Because it's human.
Mm-hmm.
It's human. People like to connect with other people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the biggest gift you can give to somebody is to speak right to them and or to listen to them.
Well, now there's a member of your organization. I saw that you're a member of the National Speakers Association.
Yes.
And Jeannie Robertson
is
a phenomenon. Right. But do you know who she recommends? Andy Griffith. Mayberry Humor.
Yeah.
I bought her book, Mayberry Humor, because what she's leading you to is that down-home humor, and to do personalities one against the other.
Oh,
is that what you look for?
Yes. Oh, yes. I mean, that's very good advice.
Yeah, and so is that what you look for in the stories that people bring in to tell you, the one that you think has those characteristics?
Yes, it's the one. It's the one that has those characteristics. But more than that, I'm looking for a story that that is a moment in time when somebody had a turning point, at a time when they changed their behavior or they changed their mind in some way, and that story illustrates why they did it and the value of what they did.
Can you give us an example that you might be thinking of?
Well, I can give you a short version of my own.
Yes, please do.
I wasn't planning to tell you this. I haven't practiced
no,
it.
please.
But as a teenager, I was really looked a lot better than I do today. I had long blonde hair and I was thin, and I thought I was an undiscovered popular person.
I love it. That's a great. Everybody's been an undiscovered popular person.
Yeah,
right?
well, you know how it is. I tried to like football. I tried to like all the things I was supposed to like, and it never worked. And I never became popular in high school. Then I went to college and had a clean slate. And I thought, oh, goody, you know, it's all going to work here. And I never became popular, even though I tried. I went to the football games. I almost joined a sorority, didn't quite decide to do it. But in my senior year, I met a handsome Air Force officer, and he asked me to marry him. He thought I was a popular person. Fast forward 13 years, he discovered that I wasn't, so he decided he didn't want to be married to me.
Oh, wow.
It was devastating. Then fast forward to 1993. I was sitting in my chair in my office, and this coworker came in and said, Sally, you wouldn't believe what I found. You should see this, and it's so funny. It was the personals on the internet. And so I looked at it and I thought, well, what am I going to do with that? Well, later on, I'm in my family room with my son Peter and his best friend James, and we're watching Revenge of the Nerds. And it's like the 13th time. And I'm thinking, why am I watching this dumb movie? And then as the nerds triumphed at the end of the movie, it hit me. I'm a nerd. All my life, I've been hiding my nerdness. I've been pretending to read popular books and had my science fiction books hidden. And so I posted an ad on the internet saying, computer nerd here looking for love. And I got my husband, Ray, who wants me because I'm a computer nerd. He wants me because I'm an introvert. He wants me because I don't want to go out to dinner at 9 o'clock in a bustling place. I'd rather go to dinner at 5. So the reason I'm telling you this story is because I learned from that when I'm authentic, when I just put myself out there as who I am, I attract the people that are right for me.
Right.
And so that's what I help my clients do. I help them showcase who they authentically are. And then they get the right speaking engagements, they get the right business, and everything works, and you don't have to remember what you said because you're telling the truth.
Thank you for sharing that. That is beautiful. And don't you forget, www.definingstory.com. Sally Strackbein. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for having me. It was fun, Ellouise.
Come back. We'll have another guest next time.